Chapter 11. A liveried waiter pulled open the gilded doors of the Hotel Elysée as Rue stepped out of her car. Slipping off her silver fox fur coat, she revealed a black velvet gown embedded with rhinestones and a silver sash at her waist, shimmering like the Milky Way cutting across a star-studded night sky. Her alluring appearance drew the eyes of patrons and employees alike as the maître d' escorted her to the table where Autor sat, waiting. Rue assessed the bespectacled journalist. The opportunity her father had spoken of was this unremarkable, bookish young man. She had never heard of him before, but it came as no surprise that her father, with his many eyes and ears, had, as she recalled the conversation they had the day before. "He's a junior reporter with the World. Our people tell me he's been prying about our business lately. In other words, another young fool who doesn't know his boundaries," Don Corvo scoffed. "However, he spends his time loitering in the archives and seems to have only picked up scant rumors and gossip so far."
"But doesn't that make him a threat, Daddy? How would he be an asset to us?"
Rue asked, frowning. "In the future, yes, he could cause us trouble. Should he ever uncover something truly detrimental to us, then he will have to be taken care of. For now, as I have said, it's best not to draw unnecessary attention to ourselves. Instead, I want you to use this opportunity to draw information from him and find out whether or not he's been in contact with the police. If that is so, we might need to quiet him sooner rather than later."
"But what if this meeting he set up is a trap? We'd be walking right into it."
Don Corvo laughed, a low cackling sound made all the more sinister by the old man's dark eyes. "Of course it is! These reporters, they're a sly breed after all. But I trust that you can manage them, Rue." He clutched her shoulder firmly. "Don't disappoint me, daughter." That single sentence had propelled Rue here, as she stood in the dining room of the posh hotel, beside an empty seat at a table set for two.
"No, I won't fail you, Daddy,"
Rue told herself sternly as Autor stood from his chair to greet her.
"I'll show Muto that I can do this on my own."
Rue pushed a well-practiced smile onto her lips and allowed Autor to pull back her chair for her before taking a seat. "Thank you once again for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice, Miss Lignani," Autor said once he'd taken his seat again at the table.
"You're too kind, Mr. Brahms,"
Rue replied sweetly. The table lapsed into silence as Rue daintily perused her menu, while Autor pretended to look down at his own menu, sneaking occasional glances at the actress. Now that Rue was here, Autor knew he would have to choose his words wisely, lest he give his intentions away. The challenge at this point was how he would broach the subject of her father's absence from the opera without arousing suspicion. He had been thinking about the question ever since he'd gotten the idea to interview the Corvo heiress. From his own research, as well as stories published in various newspapers, Autor knew a good deal about Rue Corvo, in terms of both her family as well as her career. "I mustn't rush," Autor reminded himself. "Start with small talk, ask about her career, then ask her about the opera and segue into inquiring about her father. Act natural." As Autor stole another glance, Rue also happened to look up, and catching his eyes, she flashed him another smile. This one simple smile displaced the meticulous logic in Autor's mind, and he was suddenly struck by her alluring appearance. She was beautiful, even more so tonight than she had been the night of the opera when he'd first met her in person. The wide cut of her neckline revealed flawless ivory skin that seemed to glow in the soft candlelight. Autor felt his cheeks flush, and he ducked his head sharply back into the menu when a waiter approached their table. While Rue ordered her meal, Autor took several long sips of his glass of ice water in an effort to calm himself. This was the most important interview of his career, his one chance to get up close and personal with the most powerful crime family in the city, yet all he had accomplished so far was to sit there ogling the Corvo heiress. Caught up in his self-deprecation, Autor almost didn't hear the waiter's question. "And you, sir?" "Ah!" Autor's head snapped up, quickly glanced back down at the menu, and picked the first item his eyes came across. "I will have the canton rôti and another glass of water, please." The waiter assented with a brisk nod, and after the server had retreated, Rue said offhandedly, "I'm remembering some of my reporter friends at the World telling me once that they'd hired a new reporter. I know many of the reporters from various agencies, but you're a fresh face. I assume then you must be the man they were talking about." Autor, more composed now, nodded. "I started about a year and a half ago. Since I am relatively junior, I'm usually in the office instead of being in the field. But due to my relatively extensive background in training in classical music, my editors would, from time to time, ask me to cover operas and concerts. What instrument do you play, if you don't mind me asking? The piano. My father owned a music shop and he taught me to play the piano when I was a boy.
Oh, that's wonderful, Mr. Brahms. Would you mind awfully if I called you Autor? I much prefer addressing people by their given name.
Autor blinked and then smiled.
Ah, yes, certainly. Grand.
Rue's lips curved upward and she sat back contentedly into her chair like a purring cat.
I don't know if you already know this, but I used to dance ballet, and every practice would be accompanied by piano. It's amazing how a humble collection of smooth ivory keys and taut steel wires can produce such beautiful music, Rue said as the fingers of her hand nimbly tapped the table in rhythm, as though playing an imaginary keyboard. It brings back some wonderful memories.
Autor was well aware that Rue used to be a ballet dancer, and one with no small amount of talent either. He wondered what Rue's dance would be like. Gracefully and technically superb, surely, but also sensual and passionate. He cleared his throat, hurriedly shelving that thought. Speaking as much to distract himself as to continue the conversation, he said to Rue, "Yes, but that's now more of a hobby than a full-time pursuit of mine. You see, Miss Lignani—"
"Call me Rue, please."
Autor was at first thrown off by the request, but then he slowly answered, "Rue, as I was saying, my passion now is in journalism. I'm fascinated by the art of storytelling, and I want to be the best storyteller there is."
"The best reporter in the world,
Rue smiled, cocking a thin eyebrow at him.
"Then you must be working very hard to achieve that goal, and I do like a man with ambition."
She shifted forward slightly in her seat.
"To tell you the truth, I was surprised when you called me about the Bartered Bride, since my agent hadn't made a public announcement that I would be attending. How did you know I had been there at the opera?"
Autor realized this was a trick question. She was probing him to see how much he already knew. But this was a question Autor had well anticipated. He inwardly smiled with pride and answered coolly, "Actually, we met once before, at the opera the other night, in fact. I was rather absent-minded and bumped into you by the ballroom entrance."
"Oh?"
Rue was genuinely surprised, pausing to recollect. It took her several seconds to remember the incident, as she had been so intent on finding Muto at the time. "Yes, but you seemed to be in a hurry, so I wouldn't expect that you'd remember."
"I confess, I really don't recall it. I was, as you said, in a bit of a rush that night."
Thinking this to be a perfect opportunity to inquire about Don Corvo, Autor opened his mouth, only for the waiter to arrive with their food, forcing the reporter to hold his questions back. "Patience, patience," he told himself as the plates were set down before them. "Don't rush." Rue cast a momentary glance at him before picking up her fork.
"The performance itself was very good, if I might say so. I can't comment too much on the singing, as I'm no singer myself, but in terms of stage production it was very well done," she said, spoiling Autor's opening by smoothly steering their conversation into a different direction. During the rest of their meal, they discussed the opera and other trivial and innocuous subjects. By the time their plates were cleared away and coffee and mints had been served, Autor decided it was time to get to the heart of the matter. How will she respond? Autor wondered as he absent-mindedly stirred his coffee with a spoon. Will she be angry for prying, or will she just evade the topic? His anxiety and anticipation made the young reporter's hand unsteady, causing the spoon he held to slip from his fingers and make a graceless clink against the edge of the porcelain cup. He swallowed, feeling Rue's eyes on him. Picking up his cup and trying to look casual, he inquired, "I know your father, Mr. Corvo, is a great patron of the Met, and he makes a point of attending all of their premiere performances, but I don't recall seeing him that night at the theater." Autor plucked up the courage to meet Rue's eyes. But the young actress's expression was unreadable, one slender finger of her hand lazily tracing the smooth rim of her untouched coffee cup. Then she said softly, "You mentioned you used to play the piano and are quite knowledgeable about music. But I wonder, how do you fancy jazz?" Bewildered by her question, Autor stammered, Well, I can't say I'm an expert on that particular form of music, if it could be called as such, though it has a definite sense of, passion behind it." He pursed his lips. "But I've only been to a handful of performances and can't really comment much on the topic, I'm afraid," Autor answered cautiously, having no idea how this was related to the subject. Rue leaned forward, her elbows resting at the edge of the table, her voice coy. "In that case, I must show you what real jazz is all about. I know a swanky club that has an absolutely fabulous band playing tonight. They also have a superb bar. None of that coffin varnish and rot gut stuff there.
That certainly had not been a response Autor had anticipated.
But I'm...
Rue swiftly quieted him when she reached out across the table and covered the back of his hand with hers, sending a wave of heat through Autor's cheeks.
I like you, Autor, and I really would like to talk for a while longer. This is a fine place, but I can't speak freely here.
Leaning closer, she whispered,
You see, the truth is, there's something I've been wanting to get off my chest, but it's a rather delicate matter, you understand? I'd prefer to talk about it in private.
Autor's heart rate had been steadily climbing during this whole exchange, and at this latest request he felt as though his heart would pound itself right out of his chest. With excitement, he thought, This is it! This is your chance to get closer than ever to the Corvos! But immediately, the cautious part of him fretted. What is she planning? Could this be a trap? A mental tug-of-war ensued, and he found himself stuttering as he tried to respond intelligently. I'm not very good with drinks. That is to say, it's illegal, and...
Oh, don't tell me you believe in all that sobriety nonsense, Rue admonished him.
Then she gazed right into Autor's eyes, her lips curling upward temptingly.
Don't you worry. We won't get pinched at this place. I guarantee it.
With that one look, that one small smile, Autor's defenses were broken, and half an hour later he found himself looking at a nondescript building squeezed between a soda shop and a laundry, whereupon Rue had the taxi driver drop them both off across the street. As Autor climbed out of the cab and approached the location, the bespectacled young man watched as a young couple stepped up to a door on the side of the building. They knocked, and after saying something to whomever was inside, he saw the man slip something that looked like a bill through a small sliding hatch. As the taxi drove off and Rue walked up to Autor, the couple stepped into the opened door, which closed just as promptly as it had been opened.
This way,
Rue said as she walked up to the doorway. She rapped once on the wooden door, and from the small sliding hatch a pair of hooded eyes peered out at them suspiciously. When they caught on Rue, however, the eyes grew wide and the door was hastily opened. Rue gestured for Autor to follow her. As Autor walked through the threshold of the doorway, he could make out chords of lively jazz music and a heavy waft of cigarette smoke in the air. The doorman led the two of them to another pair of doors, and when the doors opened, a blast of raucous music pummeled Autor's ears. The ballroom-sized space in front of him bore no resemblance to the bland facade of the outer building. A bar, abuzz with thirsty patrons, ran the length of the entire room and featured a well-stocked cabinet with a plethora of fine liquors. There was a live jazz band, belting out song after song as people took to the large dance floor in the center of the room, their heels clicking and tapping away with spirited abandon. Others sat on the varnished wood and plush leather furniture, often with a cocktail in one hand and a cigarette in the other, talking and laughing openly. But what really caught Autor's attention was the big sign in the doorway where he and Rue stood. On it, neon lights, something that Autor had only before seen in photographs, spelled The Nest, in large bold letters, enveloping the entrance area in an eerie red glow. A small-statured man appeared from the crowd and greeted Rue. She said something back to the man, though Autor could not hear what was said above the clamor of music and other voices. The man motioned for them to follow him, and Autor scanned the crowd as they made their way towards the back of the speakeasy. Judging from the furs, jewelry, and brands the patrons were sporting, this was a distinctly affluent group. Autor was even surprised to recognize some of the faces he saw here, including 2 city officials, a public trustee, and a police inspector. No wonder Rue guaranteed this place was safe, Autor thought dryly as the pair were led up a staircase to a private lounge overlooking the stage. Though the music still drummed relentlessly into his ears, the volume was lower than it had been downstairs, and Autor could now hear what Rue said to the small man.
A bottle of your best port wine, the actress said as she shrugged off her coat and hat into the arms of their waiter.
The black-suited man nodded, and after collecting Autor's outer garments as well, he disappeared down the stairs, leaving the reporter alone with Rue. Autor walked to the edge of the lounge, and stood at the railing to look down at the stage. Below him the trumpets and trombones swung from side to side in time with the infectious beat, the bright brass of the instruments gleaming under the spotlights. Despite the freezing conditions outside, the room was sweltering, with sweat glistening on the brows of the dark-skinned musicians along with those of the audience as their frenzied dancing continued.
So, what do you think?
Autor turned to Rue, who gazed at him with expectant eyes. It's very grand, he replied, sitting down at the table just as the waiter returned. Altor watched as their server set down a platter of fruits and opened the wine bottle with a small pop, pouring the dark garnet liquid into a decanter. I mean, this is actually my first time in such an establishment, but it's very lively here. Do you come here often? Rue chuckled and picked up the decanter. She poured the port wine into both the glasses and then picked up the glass closest to her. Swirling the contents around the glass, Rue closed her eyes and breathed in the rich scent of the wine before bringing it to her lips.
Once in a while, when I feel like I need to quench my thirst.
She arched an eyebrow at Autor, who sat still studying her, his hands folded on his lap.
You should try it. It's a 40-year-old vintage from Doro.
Flitting his eyes onto the glass before him, Autor hesitated. But I'm supposed to be on official business for the Bureau. Rue laughed.
Oh, don't worry, I won't tell, she said, raising her glass to him. This will be just between you and me.
Emboldened by her gesture, Autor plucked up his wineglass by its stem. Copying Rue, he brought the glass to his face, closed his eyes, and inhaled. The vibrant aroma of the wine was sweet and seductive.
Just like her,
a voice whispered in Autor's ears. He hastily swallowed the thought with the wine, and a rather exceedingly large gulp of it. Rue watched the bespectacled young man with half-lidded eyes as he quickly put his glass back down, coughing and clearing his throat. Excuse me, I'm not very good at this. As he reached for the handkerchief in his pocket, a pair of soft, pale hands held his outstretched hand in place, and he glanced up to find Rue sitting right next to him, her face inches from his. Autor's eyes widened and his face flushed, though it was impossible to tell how much was from the wine and how much was from Rue's extreme proximity to him.
Can I trust you with a secret, Autor?
She whispered into his ear, her breath brushing against his flaming cheeks. Autor could only sputter. What do you mean?
I like you, Autor. I meant it when I said so earlier. It's so hard to find someone trustworthy and truthful nowadays.
She edged closer to him, her knees touching his thigh.
You certainly are a swell fellow, cultured and gentlemanly as you are, so I feel like I can be honest with you.
Well, I'm honored that you think so highly of me, Miss Rue. Unsure where this was headed, Autor focused on the actress's earnest face, trying to not let her touch distract him. Picking up their wine glasses again, Rue passed Autor's cup to him.
As you probably know,
Rue pensively swirled the port in her wine glass with her 4 fingers.
My father is quite the figure in this city. When he had stepped off Ellis Island, he had scarcely $1 in his pocket and only some old clothes in his trunk. He was a hard-working man, a smart man, and he made himself into what he is today with hard work and tireless effort. As his daughter, I have seen all this, and yet...
Here, the raven-haired young woman glanced down and took a deep breath. Had Autor been less entranced, he would have recognized this as one of her signature dramatic pauses, often seen on screen in her movies.
You've probably heard them before, all of those awful rumors. That Daddy is involved with criminals, that he consorts with murderers and thieves. He's one of the great citizens of the city. Can you believe this bourgeois people are spouting?
Surprised by her assertion, Autor wondered silently if maybe Rue really had no idea about her father's enterprises. Taking a smaller sip of the wine this time, Autor cleared his throat before he said, Well, that's just talk, isn't it? You shouldn't let idle gossip bother you.
Oh, but it does! To see Daddy's reputation sullied like this. And the police certainly are no help. They've been dogging us for so long now.
She crossed her arms.
I'm sure you've heard about that bribery case from 2 years ago. It caused a huge, ridiculous racket, and all because of someone trumpeting up charges that the police made up.
Her eyes narrowed.
I'll bet that what they're really after is for the right chance to get a big fat payoff from Daddy, those greedy mongrels.
Turning to Autor, Rue looked at his eyes inquiringly.
Though I don't suppose everyone agrees with that sentiment. What do you think about our city's finest?
I can't say I have much love for the police either, Autor confided. He recalled Fakir's response to his project and scowled, his pride still bruised from the mental blow. I've had an encounter with one recently, a real arrogant bastard he was.
So I see I'm not the only one who thinks so then.
Rue laughed and raised her glass to her companion. After both of them had downed another swig of their wine, Rue asked,
If you don't mind me asking, what did this old mulligan do to you?
Oh, he's not Irish. His parents are Portuguese with some Moorish blood on his mother's side, I think. Fakir Ramirez is his name. His eyes peering down into the wine glass in his hand, Autor didn't notice Rue's eyes widen and then narrow in the dim light of their lounge. Rue wanted to ask him to tell her more, but she didn't need to, as Autor continued without prompting. He's rude and full of himself and his own opinions. I spoke with him about a story. That is, a story I was working on at the time, Autor said after a pause, his mind beginning to feel sluggish, but even in his muddled state he knew better than to expose his modus operandi. I went to the police to ask for some information on the story I was working on, but was turned away, flat out dismissed because he thought my story was a waste of time. He sighed curtly. I don't know how his neighbor puts up with him, or for that matter, why she'd go to an opera with him. Though she was a bit of a strange girl too, very odd name. By now, Rue was sitting flush against Autor, and she goaded him eagerly. Yes? Autor blinked, his mind clouded like a thick, opaque fog. Her name was... It was some sort of bird, I think. Ah, Duck! That's her name. No mistaking it. Duck? Autor looked over and nodded at Rue, who was staring at him aghast. Yes, I know. Funny name, isn't it? I wonder where her family got the idea for that name. It's so odd. Autor chuckled, taking another drink from his glass, and Rue laughed with him in disbelief, but for an entirely different reason. The likelihood of two girls being named Duck in New York City was almost zero. But even then, Rue had to know with absolute certainty if this Duck, who Autor was speaking of, was the same person she met at the point shoe shop. So she pressed him. Tell me, what does she look like? Does she actually look like a duck? By now, the alcohol, the heat, and the cacophony from below were noticeably addling Autor's mind. Blearily, he replied, She had red hair, and she has a loud voice, which is kind of duck-like, I suppose. But I didn't get a very good look at her, so I can't say if she actually waddles when she walks or anything. Rue glanced away, her expression guarded. That account was confirmation enough. It was the same girl. She turned back to Autor, hoping to pry more details out of him, but his head was already wilted drunkenly toward the back of the coach. Sure, she could try to get more information out of him, but trying to extract information out of a half-conscious, thoroughly intoxicated young man was almost as feasible as trying to interrogate a dead body. Rue sighed resignedly, and after summoning their waiter, arranged to have the staff hail a taxi to take the groggy reporter home. Once Autor had been carefully escorted down the steps, Rue stood at the railing, watching the crowd below her thoughtfully. It could have been a fluke that Duck, the shop girl she knew, was neighbors with her family's arch-enemy, but the fact that Rue had also run into Duck that day at the opera, along with this recent tale from Autor, made her begin to wonder if all this could have occurred merely by coincidence. Was there some kind of connection between them? She remembered what her father had said. It was possible that the detective had come to the opera to look for Muto. But if Duck had attended the opera with him... Rue frowned. Duck had been unaccompanied during the whole time Rue was with her at the opera, which implied the girl and the detective weren't particularly close, so it was unlikely he had a purely personal reason for such an invitation. If not, then what other reason could there be? In any way she looked at it, their association seemed out of place. The Corvo family had been searching tirelessly for the witness that the detective had gotten a hold of, whose identity somehow managed to continually elude them. Normally, the police would periodically contact their witnesses to ask further questions about the crime or inform them about a court date. All this would be recorded, and in the past, the family's informant within the police department had been able to uncover the identity of witnesses from paperwork or idle chatter amongst the officers. But in this instance, there was nothing. No slip of the tongue, no paper trail. It would appear as though there had been no further contact between the police and the mysterious witness since he or she was first identified, a fact that Rue knew was impossible for a case of this magnitude. The far more likely scenario was that the police had the witness under their custody somewhere, someplace. Rue was sure Fakir, as the lead detective on the case, must be the one guarding and making contact with the witness. But that brought up another conundrum. Based on the preliminary inquiries Oreki had made in the last 2 days about the detective's habits, Fakir appeared to have a well-established routine. Their source within the police force confirmed that Fakir never left the precinct office for long periods of time unless he was called out to work on a case, and most of the time he would be accompanied by at least one fellow officer. And as for his personal habits, according to the manager of the building he lived in, he always left and came back from work at about the same time each day and stayed at home on the weekends. This was unusual for a police officer, as they usually worked long, odd hours, but this detail in and of itself was not alarming. Rue ran over the information their spy had sent her father earlier in the day, her mind completely blocking out the noises of the speakeasy. Based on what they knew so far, it was unlikely the detective had a breadth of time where he could go off by himself to see the witness. The building Fakir lived in did not have telephone connections, so he must have conducted his interview with the witness some other way. Communicating through the mail was an option, but the likelihood of a letter getting lost in the delay made it seem improbable. Then what about the simplest, most direct way? Perhaps the detective kept the witness under constant supervision, close to him, in plain sight. Rue chewed her lip, her mind racing. If that was so, could it be possible that, rather than Fakir looking for Muto on his own, the detective had instead brought his witness along, not only to continue supervising the witness, but to ID Muto for him as well? Then, wouldn't it mean that the witness had all along been Duck? Grimacing, Rue internally shook her head. No, she was letting her imagination run away with her. There were too many things that were unknown to her at this point. It could have been just as likely that the detective needed a companion for the opera in order to appear less conspicuous, and so simply dragged his convenient next-door neighbor along. There was no need to assume from this one incident that Duck and the detective's case were related. Besides, how unbelievable a twist of fate would it be if the witness they had been searching for all this time simply waltzed into the opera and made small talk with the Corvo's daughter herself? In any case, it still aggravated Rue that the stubborn thorn in her family's side might have, for whatever reason, saddled himself with this shop girl, whom Rue reluctantly acknowledged she had taken a liking to during their first meeting. So the actress had to admit to herself as well that the mere notion of Duck's involvement would continue to pester her anyway if she didn't make some sort of effort to put her wild speculations to rest. Luckily for Rue, her father had already planted an agent near Fakir. It wouldn't be that much more work to keep an eye on his neighbor, too. With that in mind, Rue turned to the server waiting behind her. "Contact Areki and tell him to come see me. I have another assignment for him."